In this video, we're going to clone our private Bitbucket repository to our Codenvy workspace, make some modifications to get the tests to pass, and then we're going to push these modifications back to the Bitbucket repository. So the terminology, it's important to agree that the Bitbucket, the hosted Bitbucket repository, is the remote, and the Codenvy is local with respect to the hosted Bitbucket repository. If you are working locally using an IDE or the command line on your computer, then of course that would be the local copy of the repository. All right, so first step is to go to the Bitbucket repository here on the right, and there is an SSH URL, so we're going to copy and paste that here. Now we'll say git clone and then paste that URL, and with the uploaded SSH key that should go smoothly and without a password, but it will ask us for the passphrase for the key. So now we can enter that project root directory, and it's actually useful to have the tree command for comprehending the project structure on the command line. So we can easily install this by saying sudo apt install tree. Okay, here it is. So we can say tree. And as you notice, there are only source and configuration files, but no .class files, which would be generated files. And to make sure that no generated files are ever added to the repository, we always have to have a .gitignore, and we can take a quick look at that. And here it is. So it makes sure there are no .class files or the target directory where Scala generated files go are ever included in the repository. We could see that in tree by saying tree-a, so it shows up right here. Of course, we can see the project structure here as well. Okay, on the in the Project Explorer. All right, now the next step is to run SBT test. SBT is our Scala build tool, similar to Gradle for Java. SBT can also handle Java projects. The configuration syntax is, of course, different. It's Scala based. Usually these various downloads are just a one-time step because they get cached locally. Okay, so what do we have? Well, we were able to run the tests. That's a great success. The tests failed. Okay, well, that's part of our challenge here. And now the task is to get the tests to pass, so we have to look at these error messages, and there is a set of failed tests here in echo test, and let's start by looking at that. But of course we want to modify the system under test, not the tests. But to find out what's wrong with the system under test, we will look in the test. So here it said echo test 22. Okay. That was with double echo, okay. And in 26 as well. So we'll probably have to look at double echo. And what we see here is the square brackets here in the test output narrow down the actual occurrence of the error. So let's see. And what we see is that, let's look again at echo test. So we need to scroll right a little bit. Okay. So double echo of the empty string should be just a single blank space. And double echo of the string hello should be hello space hello. And what we got was basically the space and then an extra space here, as opposed to just the space and then nothing, as indicated by the square brackets. So the square brackets point out the fact that the actual result is actual result has that additional space instead of just a single space. So if we go back to the system under test, we notice here that this is wrong, right? So this has two spaces right here, that string between the two occurrences of the word. And let's remove that. And let's see if it saves it automatically, perhaps. And let's just run the test again and see if there's a difference. Okay, so we got down from earlier 4 tests failed, as you saw initially. Here it said 4 tests failed. We got down to 1 test failed, so that's great progress. Okay, and this one here it says, and this one says simple echo inside a list should echo an empty argument, and here we need to look at the first mention of line number that's within our code as opposed to library code. So we have to go back to echo test and look at line 31, and here, okay, that's actually an error in the test itself, because, so not in the system under test, because we're putting an instance of simple echo in the list, and that's the only item in the list, so this should have index 0 and not 1. And the reason that's there is to illustrate the difference between a failed test, which is usually when an assertion fails, as opposed to an error in the test that happened before we were even able to get to the assertion. And the difference is usually in the IDE. Well, passed is green, failed is orange, and error is red. So this would be a red situation. And now we fixed this, and let's run it again. And there's still a failure up there, but the test that were failing earlier didn't fail anymore. So this failure is actually in echo JUnit. We just didn't see it earlier. So we have to go to echo JUnit and look for something similar. And in fact, there's a very similar thing here on line 37, where we have an index 1 instead of a 0. So we'll go back there, 0, and now rerun the test. The reason there are these different echo JUnit, echo test, and so on is just to illustrate different testing styles you can choose in Scala. Normally you just choose one style and stick with that. This is just to show that you have several choices. Okay, So this looks like even up here under JUnit, everything has passed now. So here it says 0 failed, 6 total. So those 6 passed. And then these other ones where you have the green output, those also passed. Okay, great. So now we have made the changes that we wanted to make to correct the errors in the tests themselves and the errors in the system under test. So now the next step is to commit and push these changes back to our private Bitbucket repository. So that requires 2 steps as usual, or 3. I usually like to say git status. That tells me, okay, these are the files that I actually modified. If I want to see more detail, I can say git diff. It'll show me the actual changes. So for example, here, see how red is before, green is after. It shows exactly these changes I made. And that if we now commit them, will end up in the repository. So now git commit -a means add the current changes, and then S means sign, and M means message. So fixed errors in SUT, system under test, and tests themselves. And it's okay to have many commits. It's good if the commits are granular. Anyway, so we will say commit. Now, you might initially get this problem where you don't have a email or username configured. So that's always a one-time step also. So I'm going to configure, whoops, that was my name. So let's just say username. So I'm going to configure my actual name. And now I'm going to configure my email address. And now I can, just using the arrow keys, redo the commit. That worked. And now let's look at the commits in the repository. So here it'll say, because when you import it, it'll keep the it'll keep the commit history, because this is basically a clone of the entire history. So now we just need to do a push. You see here the most recent commit was 30 minutes ago when I updated this example. Now I'm going to say git push, and then we will refresh the commits on the right, and we should see this most recent commit with the comment. So, okay, so it said that it worked, and you see how it told us the upstream where, or the origin where we're pushing to. So it's pushing to Bitbucket echo test repository. So if we refresh here, we should see this commit. And you see here with our little commit comment here, fixed errors in SUT and tests. Okay, so this shows you the round trip workflow for cloning a private Bitbucket repository to your Codenvy workspace. So you clone it once, and then you repeatedly make changes, and then do a commit and a push.